Today, we will be ranking every single NASCAR Cup Series driver from 42nd to 1st, and I will tell you which driver was the best and which drivers were the worst at the end of the season. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. Like I said, we'll be ranking every single driver, and to be required, minimum required for this, you need to have a minimum of 7 Cup Series starts in 2021 to be eligible. So before you ask about AJ Allmendinger, he only made 5 starts, so unfortunately he's not eligible for the list. So before you ask about him, he did not make the list. So let's first jump into the 42nd spot, and that goes to David Starr. David Starr did not have a win. He had 0 top 5s, 0 top 10s, and had a 31.3 average finish. This was not the worst average finish. However, David Starr really did not have a good year this year in the NASCAR Cup Series. He ran pretty much this whole entire year with MB Motorsports, so he really did not have that great of a year. There really isn't much to say about David Starr's season. He did have a few decent runs in the Xfinity Series, and I think he ran a Truck Series a little bit too this year. Had a few decent starts, but he really wasn't that great in the Cup Series. He kind of got in the way. A lot of people were complaining about David Starr in the Cup Series field. A lot of people had problems in the Cup Series race, so he sits number 42 on this list. In the number 41 position, we have the driver of the 00 for Starcom Racing, Quintin Howe. Quintin Howe got 0 top 5s, 0 top 10s, and a 32.4 average finish and did not lead a single lap. Here's a fun fact. Everybody that ran 36 races in the NASCAR Cup Series at least got a top 10. He was the only driver that failed to get a single top 10 this season. On top of that, I believe his average finish this season was worse than last season. His best finish this whole entire season was a 13th place finish at Talladega Superspeedway. Now, Quintin Howe wrecked a lot of cars. He wasn't as big of a hassle as last year was, especially with the incident in Texas. But he really wasn't that good this year, in my opinion. And there's a reason why Starcom is shutting down, because Starcom, especially with Quintin Howe, they struggled this year. So he says 41st on my list. There's really not much to say about Quintin Howe. He struggled this year, and he sits 41st on my list. In 40 position, we have the driver who drove most of the year in the 51 car for Rick Ware Racing, Cody Ware. Cody Ware had 0 top 5s, 0 top 10s, had a 31.1 average finish, and led 5 laps at Talladega Superspeedway. Now, Cody Ware really did not have a great year in the NASCAR Cup Series. He actually did have a decent year in the Xfinity Series and actually did make a couple IndyCar starts this year, which is why he didn't run the full season. And I'll say Cody Ware in IndyCar, he did pretty decent. But in NASCAR, it was a much different story, especially if you look back at Martinsville. I remember Mike Joy was not overall very, very happy with Cody Ware after Cody Ware got involved in 2 or 3 incidents in events, including getting involved in an incident, I believe, with James Davison. So, had issues with him in that race, and in my opinion, Cody Ware really wasn't that good in the NASCAR Cup Series. He did, again, I don't think Cody Ware's a terrible driver. It's just that Cody Ware did not really do that good this year in the Rick Ware camp. Maybe next year with the upgrades at SHR, maybe he'll perform better, but Cody Ware sits 40th on this list because Cody Ware really did not have a good year in the Cup Series, in my honest opinion. In the 39 position, we have the driver who drove the 6-6 for most of the season, Timmy Hill. Timmy Hill had 0 top 5s, 0 top 10s, and a 33.8 average finish. Now, Timmy Hill's average finish really was not that great, but I have Timmy Hill a little bit higher because Timmy Hill really clapped it clean for the majority of the year. I don't really think he had a Denny DNF at all this year. Maybe he had a Super Speedway, had a DNF, but when he made starts this year, he did have, a couple decent runs. Again, his average finish really wasn't that great, but at the same time, I think Timmy Hill is a very good driver, and it's just unfortunate that with MB Motorsports, he really wasn't able to show much, and the fact they weren't able to get as much purse money to put into the cars wasn't great. On top of that, after the whole iRacing fiasco, I do think it did affect their team, because had they had enough money to run this season with the iRacing money, they probably would have ran the whole entire season, but at the same time, at least for him, he has the iRacing to back him up, and he had at least an iRacing good year, but inside of, this year on the track really wasn't that good. But at the same time, I like Timmy Hill a lot. He's a great driver. It's just unfortunate this season really did not go well for him. In the 38 position, we have the driver who drove Bracely for Rick Ware Racing pretty much most of the year, Joey Gase. Joey Gase had 0 top 5s, 0 top 10s, had a 32.3 average finish, but at least a positive for him. He actually did lead a lap, I believe, at a super speedway. I do think Joey Gase has a little bit of talent, but I'll be honest about Joey Gase. I don't think Joey Gase is an amazing driver. Like I said, he does have a little bit of talent, but like I said as well, I don't think that Joey Gase really is an amazing driver. He did all right in the NASCAR Xfinity Series when he drove for teams like Jimmy Means Racing and Go Green Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, but in the Cup Series, it's a much different story, and it doesn't help that Rick Ware Racing overall as an organization is not that great. But at the same time, Joey Gase could have had a better year in the NASCAR Cup Series here. He didn't actually do terrible in the NASCAR Series, and I'll say this, when he drove for James Racing, he did actually do pretty decent. So, I don't know what's going on with Joey Gase for next year. Maybe he'll run part-time if Rick were in the Cup Series, but he says 30th on my list, in my honest opinion. In the 37 position, we have the driver who only ran, I think, 20 starts this year in the Cup Series, but he drove for Rick Ware Racing this year, Garrett Smithley, and also drove for NBA Motorsports, Garrett Smithley. Garrett Smithley has 0 top 5s, 0 top 10s, and had a 31.3 average finish this season. Garrett Smithley did okay in his starts. I think he finished in the top 30 in a couple starts this year, which isn't absolutely terrible. Again, a 31.3 average finish, it really isn't a great year, but like I said, he drove for Rick Ware Racing a majority of the season. And like I said, there are points where he did all right this year in the 50, whether it was the 15, the 52, or the 53, whichever ride he got into. He did all right, but at the same time, I don't think Garrett Smithley did absolutely amazing this year. So he sits number 37 on my list. There's really not much other to say about Garrett Smithley this year. It's Garrett Smithley. Who knows what's going on for next year, but Garrett Smithley sits 37th on my list. In the 36th position, we have the Aussie. The driver who drove the 15 car for, I believe, 26 or 27 of the Cup Series race this year, James Davison. James Davison had 0 top 5s, 0 top 10s, and a 31.3 average finish. I think that James Davison actually does have a little bit of talent. He actually was not terrible on the road course this year. The issue for James Davison is the car, but I will give James Davison a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. James Davison actually kept it really, really clean throughout this year and was not a driver who really caused problems throughout the 2021 season. He had issues with his teammates like Cody Ware, but of course that's Rick Ware Racing, and Rick Ware Racing had a lot of problems with basically him a mean team this year. But at the same time, I do think that James Davison had his highlights throughout the year, especially on iRacing when he dominated the Dakota race on iRacing, which at least that's a positive for James Davison this year. Hopefully going into next year, Rick Ware does put him in one of their full-time cars, because I like to see James Davison in a pretty decent car, especially with the upgrades that they are getting next year with SHR and Roush Sheets engines. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, what goes on there. But James Davison had for his standards in the first season, he ran a majority of the year. He did what he could. He's not a bad driver. It's just the car wasn't that great for him, but he sits 36 in my list. In the 35th position, we have the driver who drove a select few races in the NASCAR Cup Series, only 8 starts at least, as a matter of fact, J.J. Yeley. J.J. Yeley made most of the starts for Rick Ware Racing this year and had 0 top 5s and 0 top 10s, but he did have a 29.3 average finish in those select starts this year. J.J. Yeley had a few really impressive performances, including a really strong run at Nashville, where he ran basically in the top 5 a majority of the day. And that actually was really, really impressive to watch, because at least for J.J. Yeley, and at that time for Rick Racing, that was probably one of the best performances the Rick Ware Racing Camp had this whole season, was that run at Nashville. And J.J. Yeley, like I said, I think he has improved as a driver compared to the beginning of the career where J.J. Yeley absolutely struggled. I do think that J.J. Yeley is a little bit better of a driver than he is now. And now he is than he was back in the day. So J.J. Yeley says 35th on the list. That run in Nashville really cements him higher on the list. He actually was also pretty decent in Xfinity Series whenever he drove either the 23-hour Motorsports or whether he drove for SS Greenlight. He was pretty decent in those respective series, and he sits 35th on the list. In the 34th position, we have the driver of the 52 this year for Rick Ware Racing, Josh Bilicki. Josh Bilicki is the highest driver on the Rick Ware calendar. This year he had 0 top 5s. He did, however, have 1 top 10 this season, and he had a 31.1 average finish. While Josh Bilicki did not get any amazing finishes, he did get a top 10 at Talladega Superspeedway. And on a positive note for him, he actually did have less DNFs than drivers like the Busch drivers like Kurt Busch and Kyle Busch. Also had less DNFs than Ryan Blaney and Alex Bowman this year. So one thing that Josh Bilicki really has going for him is he was a driver who really kept his nose clean throughout the year and really did not cause trouble on the racetrack. So that at least is a positive for Josh Bilicki. And like I said, I really do like Josh Bilicki a lot. I think he is a really, really good driver. It's just a shame that the car he was not really impressive. However, I like to see Josh Bilicki have a good opportunity, a really good car. Maybe if he potentially goes to one of Rick Ware cars this year and remains in a team, that is to be foreseen. But Josh Bilicki says 34 on my list, in my honest opinion. In the 33rd position, we have the driver of the 78 for Live Fast Motorsports, B.J. McCloud. B.J. McCloud made not all of his starts this year. He made some decent starts. I think he made like 25 or 26 starts in 2021. And he had 0 top 5s. He did get a top 10, I believe, at Talladega or Daytona. And he had a 29.1 average finish. I will say Live Fast Motorsports, they were a little bit disappointing this year. I expected them to be a little better than they were. But I do think as the year progressed, I did notice some decent improvements by the BJ McCloud team, including when I saw them running in the top 27 or top 28 at Martinsville Speedway, which is really, really good to see. And BJ was in that car. So it's not the driver behind the wheel, it's a problem. I do think the equipment this year, it wasn't really that great for BJ McCloud in Live Fast Motorsports here, especially when they're road course guys. The road course guys really did not do too bad in those respective rides when they were able to get into them. So hopefully going into next year, they're more of a top 30 organization. But I think BJ McCloud had a decent year as a whole. He had some decent runs. At least got one top 10, which at least is a positive for him. So he got to leave a positive mark on the season, and he now will go on to the next driver. In a 32nd position, we have the driver who basically drove 30 out of 31 out of the 36 starts this year, Justin Haley in the 77 car. Justin Haley has 0 top 5s, 2 top 10s, a 28.5 average finish, and he actually did lead 4 laps in the 2021 season. Justin Haley had a pretty decent year considering the car. Now, Justin, of course, his main focus is the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year, where he was Jim McCloud racing in the 11 car, but he will be going full-time in the Cup Series in 2022. It's unclear what the Rookie of the Year honors and Rookie of the Year honor role will be, if he's going to be eligible for that since he ran a majority of the season. That's something we're going to have to wait on in regards to that. But, like I said, 2 top 10s for Justin Haley's Spire Motorsports equipment. That is not too bad, to be perfectly honest with you. And not a bad year for Justin Haley considering the equipment. I don't think they put as much effort into this car as they were putting as much effort into the 7 car. He got to run a lot of the Cup Series this year, pretty much majority of the year, except the Daytona 500 and a couple of races when he was out for COVID-19 and earlier this year, and he got injured at points here. So, Justin Haley says 32nd on the list, and he had a decent year for the equipment that he was in. In a 31st position, we have the driver of the 38 car for Farmer Motorsports, Anthony Alfredo. Anthony Alfredo had 0 top 5s, did get 1 top 10, I believe, at Talladega, had a 27.5 average finish, and led 5 laps in the 2021 season. I'm going to be honest about Anthony Alfredo. I don't think Anthony Alfredo was as good as John Hunter Nemechek was last year. And Anthony Alfredo had a lot of accidents this year, almost as accident-prone as John Hunter Nemechek was in the 2020 season. And this is no offense to Anthony Alfredo, but I do feel like that if had Anthony Alfredo had another year in the NASCAR Xfinity Series full-time and had the ride that Maya Snyder had this year, I do feel like Anthony Alfredo would have been a much better driver coming up the Cup. Maybe like in 2022, would have made up his jump up the Cup and probably would have been a lot better of a driver. I also think they put a lot more emphasis on the other farm car and a driver that we'll talk about later in this video. But Anthony Alfredo really didn't have a great year, and unfortunately, he is now returning to Farmer Motorsports in 2022. We don't know who's going into that ride, but it's unclear who will be in that. But Anthony Alfredo set 31 on the list. He really didn't have a great year. I believe it's the second worst finishing car that was chartered this year and the second worst finishing car driver that ran full-time, that ran for the points. So he's the 31st on the list. He really didn't have a great year for the Sanders, but again, I don't think it's much emphasis, and I do think that his youth, he's only being 22 years old. I think another year in Xfinity will be really, really good for him next year, but he's not returning to Front Row in 2022, and he says 31st on my list. In the number 30 position, we have the driver who drove the 7 car First Fire Motorsports, Corey LaJoie. Corey LaJoie only had 0 top 5s, only had 1 top 10, had a 24.8 average finish, and led 13 laps in the 2021 season. Corey LaJoie's season, I'll admit, was a little bit disappointing. I do think that Corey LaJoie did have some pretty good and awesome shining moments. He ran really well at Darlington in the later portions of this year, had a great car at Daytona going into the playoffs, had a chance to win that playoff race, that Daytona cutoff race, to try to get into the playoffs, and also had a pretty good run going at Darlington where they finished in the top 20. And at the end of the year, they really started getting their stuff together. I do have a feeling going into next year, Corey LaJoie will be a much better driver. I think Corey LaJoie has a lot of talent. I just think that this Aspire Motorsports' first year was somewhat competitive equipment, and they had a lot of mechanical problems here, which I think overall affected Corey LaJoie in the 2021 season, which is such a shame because I think Corey LaJoie is a great driver. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but Corey LaJoie sits number 30 on my list. In the number 29 position, we have the driver of the 37 for JT Doherty Racing, Ryan Preece. Ryan Preece had 1 top 5, 4 top 10s, had a 22.8 average finish, and led 12 laps in the season. Ryan Preece at the beginning of this year actually was really, really good. For the first 4 or 5 races of the season, he actually remained in the top 16 of points. As a matter of fact, both of the JT Doherty cars were actually in the top 16 of points in the first couple races of the season. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. ended up being there a lot longer. But Ryan Preece at the beginning of this year really did well. And considering they probably weren't putting as much effort into Ryan Preece's car, he did have a decent year. However, there were a lot of mechanical troubles and a lot of mechanical problems that unfortunately ailed Ryan Preece throughout the season. I think cost Ryan Preece a really good season. That could have been good sending him off because he's not going to be back at JT Doherty next year, which is unfortunate because I think Ryan Preece does 100% deserve to be in the NASCAR Cup Series. Again, it's really unfortunate that he won't be continuing racing in the Cup Series, but it is what it is. He did have an okay year considering the car, but I wish it was a little bit better. I think he's got a lot of talent. He just needs a better ride that he should be going into next season. In the number 28 position, we had the driver who drove the 6 car for Roushman Racing, Ryan Newman. Ryan Newman had 2 top 5s, 5 top 10s, had a 22.5 average finish, and only led 4 laps in the 2021 season. Ryan Newman definitely had another kind of not good year. He was a little bit better than last year's season. I'll admit that. And for the early portion of this year, Ryan Newman actually looked pretty decent and was actually competing for the playoffs for the first 12 or 13 races of the season. But unfortunately, as the year progressed, I do think that Roush fell off. And unfortunately, at that time, Ryan Newman fell off. I do feel like that Ryan Newman has really not been the same since his crash took place at Daytona. Had that crash not happened, I think Ryan Newman would be better. Now, the future for Ryan Newman is really unclear after the season, but I don't want to see Ryan Newman go out like this. I think Ryan Newman has a lot of talent. He just had a lot of wrecks that unfortunately affected him. And unfortunately, that Daytona wreck really, ever since then, he's not been the same. His brain unfortunately got damaged in that accident. So it really was an unfortunate season for Ryan Newman, and he really didn't have a great year. Hopefully, he is able to find a way. Maybe he takes over the front row car next year. Who really knows? But he sits 28th on my rankings list. In a 27 position, we have the only other non-full-time driver in this ranking, and that is Austin Cindric, who drove the 33 for Team Penske throughout the season. Austin Cindric had 0 top 5s, 1 top 10, had a 22.7 average finish, and did lead 8 laps. Now, the reason I have Austin Cindric this high on this list is because Austin Cindric had a couple really good shining moments, and unfortunately, his average finish did not reflect on how good of a season he had in his select starts in the Cup Series. At Road America, he had probably the fastest car in that event and led a couple laps in that event, but unfortunately had mechanical problems. At COTA, I think he got spun out in that event and was actually really, really fast early and led in the early portion of this race. And get what? He was on dry tires in the rain. So he really was impressive. And he does having a good run at Kansas before he had issues late in that event. So Austin Cindric's runs and his average finish and the finish he got this year in average finish don't reflect on how good Austin Cindric was in the Cup Series. And I am actually really looking forward to see how Austin Cindric is going to perform in the Cup Series next year. Because I do think Austin Cindric is being a rookie next year. I could see him potentially winning 1 or even 2 Cup races next year. We could see the next superstar show up and win a few races. But again, it is very tough for rookies to win, even though he does have a few Cup starts. It probably will be a little bit tough for Austin Cindric to win. But he will be full-time with Team Penske next year, and I think that he had a pretty good select start in the NASCAR Cup Series this year. In the 26th position, we have the driver that drove the 41 for Stewart-Haas Racing this year, Cole Custer. Cole Custer had 0 top 5s, 2 top 10s, had a 21.3 average finish, and only had 9 laps left throughout the 2021 season. Cole Custer absolutely was disappointing once again. Last year, he was able to at least win a race, but his season last year was disappointing. I have to say, of the big 3 in 2019 Xfinity Series, he's been the most disappointing. Yes, he does have a win, but other than that, he really has not been that impressive as a driver in the NASCAR Cup Series. But I will say with practice qualifying coming back in some capacity next year, and I did see him have a good run at Phoenix, I do think the lack of practice qualifying has affected Cole Custer in some shape or form. I do think it has affected his performance. So hopefully going into next season with practice qualifying coming back, he can perform better. He's going to be with the team for long term regardless because he is the son of Joe Custer, who is the president of Stewart-Haas Racing. So he's going to be with the team for a while regardless, so he's not going anywhere anytime soon. He sits 26 on this list. I wish he had a little bit more done this year, but it is what he is, and he sits number 26. In the 25th position, we have the number 99 for Trackhouse Racing, Daniel Suarez. Daniel Suarez had 1 top 5, 4 top 10s, had a 20.1 average finish, and led 74 laps this season. Daniel Suarez definitely had some pretty impressive moments. Now, I do think this year he had a lot of mechanical problems on the cars, which really affected him, including at the road courses. It had a string of really, really bad finishes, and the team just didn't really improve from the start to the end of the year. But they did end the year with a couple good runs. At Texas, I think they had a decent run at Kansas, and I think they had an okay run at Phoenix earlier this year as well. And I remember Bristol Dirt, where they straight up had the best car at one point in that race, which is really impressive considering Daniel Suarez had basically no experience on dirt, had his first start on dirt earlier in the weekend at Bristol Dirt, and he came into that event with little or no racing experience on dirt and out there and had a chance to win that event and left till around 50 to 60 laps to go in that event, which was really, really impressive to see. I think that Trackhouse Racing has potential going into next year, and I do think for a first-year team, they did not have as bad of a year. A solid year for Daniel Suarez. He had a good, decent year for the Sanders. In the 24 position, we have the driver of the 43 for Rich Petty Motorsports, Erik Jones. Erik Jones had 0 top 5s. He did have 6 top 10s, had a 19.7 average finish, and he led 9 laps in the 2021 season. Most of those laps led came at Daytona and Talladega this year. I'll admit, Erik Jones definitely at the beginning of the year, he had a few really, really strong runs and was decently competitive. However, in the middle portion of the year, he kind of fell off. But at the end of the year, especially in the playoffs, he got 3 of his top 10s in the final 10 races of the season. So he had actually a really good end of the year compared to a beginning of the year. It's just that the 43 car, when they lost their sponsorship and their funding, when some of those sponsors went off with Bubba Wallace, it unfortunately hurt the 43 team as a whole. I do think Erik Jones has a lot of talent. It is a shame he's not in a better car than this, but hopefully the next car going into next year, he can be better. But like I said, he did have a few pretty decent moments throughout the year, showed some pace throughout the entire season, and he sits 24th on the rankings list. In the 23rd position, we have the driver of the 14 for Truex Racing, Chase Briscoe. Chase Briscoe had 0 top 5s, 3 top 10s, had a 19.6 average finish, and led 18 laps in the season. Albeit, I was a little bit disappointed in Chase Briscoe this year, but I will give him the benefit of doubt that SHR as a whole throughout this year, they were down on performance. I do think that Chase Briscoe is actually a very, very talented driver and a generational talent. It's just that this year, besides the road course races, he really wasn't that competitive. He did get all some of his wins, basically got a lot of his good runs on road courses, especially when he backed down to the Xfinity Series. He actually was really, really fast and really impressive in those select starts. It's just a shame that this year, in his rookie year, SHR struggled, and he mentioned that the lack of practice qualifying really, really affected him. He kind of blames himself for that, but I'll say this. SHR fell off, so I do think with the next-gen car coming in, I think it could really help out a driver like Chase Briscoe, and I'm hoping going the next year, Chase Briscoe can be better, but he did have a little bit disappointing year. If I had to give a grade for him, I'd give him a C+. I give him a decent grade. Not an amazing grade, but I give him a C+ for his standards. But again, he was a rookie, and it's very difficult for rookies to be really great, especially in their first seasons. In the 22nd position, we have the driver, the 47 for JT Doherty Racing, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. had 1 top 5, 2 top 10s, a 19.7 average finish, and he led 35 laps in this season. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at points this year was really, really fast and actually really, really impressive. And that's why he's going to continue driving for JT Doherty Racing in the 2022 season, because he had a pretty good year this year, including some really impressive runs, including a really, really strong run at Nashville, where he ran in the top 5 most of the day, qualified really well, was extremely fast in a practice session. That experience from the Xfinity Series, running the Xfinity Series for multiple of those years, definitely helped him out. But Ricky Stenhouse Jr. 2021 had a couple really, really strong runs throughout the year. He was actually consistent, and for a while in this season, he was competing for the playoffs, really up until around Pocono. He was competing for the NASCAR Champion Cup Series to try to get into the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs this year, and for a while there, he was in the top 16. It's just a fortunate season ended the way it did, but I do hope that Ricky Stenhouse Jr. can be better next year, but he sits number 22 on the list. In the 21st position, we have the driver of the 34 for Farmer Motorsports, Michael McDowell. Michael McDowell had 1 win this year, and of course, it was a big win at the Daytona 500. Had 2 top 5s, 5 top 10s, had a 20.5 average finish, and led 26 laps on the season. Michael McDowell was really one of the most impressive drivers throughout the year, including in winning that Daytona 500. But after the 500, especially for the first portion of this year, he kept that performance up. I do think him winning the 500, they probably put a lot of the winnings that they have from the 500 into his performances. And I do think it really helped him in the 2021 season, because for a majority of the season, he ran top 20. He was a top 20 driver all year, and at points, he was running in the top 10 consistently. I remember Homestead, where he ran in the top 10 a lot of the days, so he had a really good year. He did kind of fall off as we got farther in the year. I do think if Farmer Motorsports kind of lost a lot of their advantage that they had at the beginning of the year. They kind of fell off back down to the mean. But I will say this to Michael McDowell. He did have a pretty good year. I'm really excited he's coming back to the team next year. I think he's a great driver. He had a really, really impressive year and a good year for his standards. He sits 21st on the list. Now we're going to get into the top 20. In 20 position, we have the driver of the 10 car for Truex Racing, Aric Almirola. Aric Almirola had 1 win 2 top 5s, 5 top 10s, a 19.9 average finish, and only led 51 laps in the season. Aric Almirola absolutely was very, very disappointing this year. The only reason he exists high on this list is because he got that win at New Hampshire. But I will say he had a pretty good couple really strong runs. He ran in the top 10 at Martin, so he kind of ended the year on a much higher note. Did get a pole at Nashville and led the field to the green and led a field and got that impressive win at New Hampshire. But outside of that, his season was absolutely horrendous. There was a point where we questioned if he was even going to get a top 5 and a question where he was even going to make it into the top 25 in points because his season was absolutely awful. For a while, he remained outside the top 25 in points, but like I said, he did improve as the season going on, which is why he didn't end up having as bad of a year as he could have had this year. And ended the year with 5 top 10s, but it was a major down year for Aric Almirola. I'm hoping going into next year with him expected to return to the team, I'm hoping that Aric Almirola can improve going into next year. Hopefully that is the case for Aric Almirola. He's just 20th on my list. In the number 19 position, we have the driver of the 2311 Racing, Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace had 1 win in the 2021 season, 3 top 5s, 3 top 10s, had an 19.7 average finish, and led 62 laps in the 2021 season. I'll admit, I kind of was a little bit expecting more expectations for Bubba Wallace this year. I think our expectations were really, really through the roof for Bubba Wallace because he had a new team coming in with Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin forming it. But I'll admit, I think we jumped our expectations up because for the beginning of the year especially, they started up this year on the wrong note. But I will say Bubba Wallace actually did improve as the year progressed. He got a lot better as a driver and did show more speed the farther we did get into the season. And unfortunately, last couple races did not end very, very well. But like I said, he got 3 top 5s and 3 top 10s, which actually isn't bad. He had his most top 5s in the season in his career, and I have Kurt Busch coming over to that team. I'm hoping things do get better. Our expectations are really, really high, and I think that Bubba Wallace going next year could be better than he was this year. I think his team has potential. That crew chief change really helped Bubba Wallace throughout the year, and he sits number 19 on this list. In the number 18 position, we have the driver of the 42 Ford Chip Ganassi Racing as they are going away this year, Ross Chastain. Ross Chastain has 0 wins, 3 top 5s, 8 top 10s, led 62 laps, and had an 18.6 average finish. Ross Chastain honestly had a pretty good year overall as a whole. He did shine throughout the year, had a really, really strong one at Nashville, where he ended up finishing, I believe, runner-up and had a chance to maybe catch Kyle Larson had we had a longer run and Kyle Larson had ran out of gas. But Ross Chastain had some really, really strong runs throughout the year. Unfortunately, his playoff hopes kind of went out the window after he had some issues at Pocono. Those 2 Pocono races really, really cost him. But Ross Chastain, for being an aggressive driver most of the time, he actually wasn't as aggressive in the 2021 season as he had been in the 2020 or even the 2019 season. And he had a pretty decent year overall as a whole for a driver. I'm really excited to see what he's going to do at Trackhouse next year. He had some pretty shining moments in the 2021 season. I'm hoping going next year he can't come into that team and do very well with Trackhouse and work with Daniel Suarez and help him and maybe even become like a little bit of a coach for him, even though they're similar in ages. Maybe become a little bit of a coach for him. But he had a decent year, had some good performances throughout this year, and he sits number 18 on this list. In the number 17 position, we have the driver of the 17th Ford Roush Fenway Racing, Chris Buescher. Chris Buescher scored 0 wins in the 2021 season. He had 1 top 5, 8 top 10s, had a 17.3 average finish, and led 93 laps in the 2021 season. Chris Buescher really impressed me throughout this whole entire season. He had, especially that race at Homestead. That race at Homestead was really, really impressive. He had the best car for the first stage of that race, and for the first 2 stages, he looked like he had the fastest car and potential to win that race. And through a lot of the beginning of this year, Chris Buescher was in contention to make the NASCAR Cup Series Plus. But like I said with Ryan Newman, unfortunately, Chris Buescher and Roush Fenway Racing kind of fell off throughout the 2021 season. And that's something I think, unfortunately, affected Chris Buescher. But I will say this about Chris Buescher. The guy did very, very well. He was very underrated throughout this year. He actually probably almost would have made the playoffs had we not had the winning year in system. He probably would have been almost able to make the playoffs in the 2021 season. But I'm really excited about next year for Chris Buescher. He's going to have a really good teammate. He's working with him, his new future owner, Brad Keselowski. Really excited about next year. And he sits 17th on my list. In the number 16 position, we have the driver who drove the 21 for Wood Brothers in 2021, Matt DiBenedetto. Matt DiBenedetto did not win a race in 2021. He had 3 top 5s, 9 top 10s, had a 60.9 average finish, and led 68 laps in the 2021 season. I'll admit, Matty D was absolutely disappointing this year, and I actually expected Matt DiBenedetto to do a little bit better this year than he did last year. He started off the year not really that great, and a lot of it I do think it was the crew chief change that really actually did help Matt DiBenedetto. When they removed Greg Irwin, I do think that Matty D overall improved, and actually having not had the win in your in system, Matt DiBenedetto actually would have made the playoffs for the second year in a row. But unfortunately, because it went in your in system, Matt DiBenedetto unfortunately did not make the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs in the 2021 season. But I will say he was very disappointing, and I expected Matt DiBenedetto at least contend for more wins than he did. 3 top 5s is not overall that bad, but when you're in a car that has a little bit of Penske affiliation in a pretty decent car, you're expected to perform a little bit better. But at the same time, he does have a little bit of talent. It's unclear where he's going next year, but he's 16th on my list, and hopefully Matty D gets a ride next year. But he's 16th on my list after kind of a disappointing year. If I had to give him a grade, I'd give him overall B-. He really could have been a little bit better this year. When the crew chief change happened, he did become better, and he sits 16th on my list. In the number 15 position, we have the driver of the 3-car for Rich Choice Racing, Austin Dillon. Austin Dillon had 0 wins, had 1 top 5, 8 top 10s, had a 14.4 average finish, and led 27 laps on the season. While Austin Dillon wasn't competing for wins a lot, he was a consistent top 10 consistent top 10 to top 15 driver throughout this year. And I will say Austin Dillon backed up his performances from the previous year. Because from 2018, he had a pretty decent year. In 2019, he had a terrible year. 2020 had a really good start to the playoffs. And in 2021, while he wasn't as good as his teammate, which we're talking about here really, really soon, Austin Dillon definitely shows signs of pretty good speed, and he has become a driver that has matured as a race car driver and has shown quite a bit of speed throughout his career. So I'm very intrigued to see how he's going to do next season, but he had a decent year overall, only got 1 top 5. He just had a decent year as a whole, but 15th place, that's not bad to be untotable. He sits 15th on my list of the rankings from 2021. In the number 14 position, we have the driver of the 8-car for Choice Racing, Tyler Reddick. Tyler Reddick did not win a race, but he had a really, really impressive season with 3 top 5s, 16 top 10s, a 15th place average finish, and 43 laps led. Usually you have drivers have the sophomore slump. He did not have that. As a matter of fact, he had the sophomore upgiving, and he was really, really impressed to watch throughout this year. As a matter of fact, in the playoffs, he really, really impressed the hell out of me. He drove his ass off throughout the entire year. Started out the year kind of on the wrong note and was really kind of looking like it was going to be sophomore slump. But around the Kansas weekend, he really started turning his performances around. And not only that, really took off as a race car driver. It was really, really cool and really fun to watch throughout this year. And I really do like Tyler Reddick in his driving abilities. And he did very, very well throughout this year. Contended for a couple wins, including at the Starr Bowl. And looked like he was going to have a chance to beat Denny Hamlin in Las Vegas. But unfortunately, a bad pitch strategy call by staying out way too long. Unfortunately, cost Tyler Reddick an opportunity to win that event. But he made the playoffs this year. He did very, very well. And he sits 14th on my list. In the 13th position, we have the driver of the 20 for Joe Gibbs Racing, Christopher Bell. Christopher Bell had 1 win this year, 7 top 5s, 16 top 10s, had a 15.8 average finish, and led 100 laps in the 2021 season. Christopher Bell admitted points was a little bit disappointing this year, and it's not that I don't think Christopher Bell was absolutely horrendous here, because Christopher Bell actually had a pretty good year. It did a little bit similar to what Eric Jones did in 2020, except he did make the playoffs in 2021 and won a race at the Daytona road course, but he did have a point, especially in the middle of the year, where he really did nothing. But as the year progressed, he did get a little bit better. It's just that if you actually look at regular season points, he would have finished around 15th in the regular season points this year, which isn't really that amazing. But Christopher Bell did have a little bit of improvement compared to 2020, where of course he drove for the Levine Family Racing. So Christopher Bell had a pretty decent year in my opinion. He's 613th. At least he did get a win. I do think his future, and he definitely think he has a lot of talent and plenty of time in his career to really, really improve. Christopher Bell sits 13th on my list for the rankings. In the number 12 position, we have the driver of the 1-car for Chip Ganassi Racing, Kurt Busch. Kurt Busch had 1 win, 6 top 5s, 14 top 10s, a 15.5 average finish, and led 208 laps in the season. Kurt Busch really did not start the season off on the right foot, to be perfectly honest with you. For the first 10 or 11 weeks of the season, he really did not have a good year. But once we got past the Coke 600, Kurt Busch started going on a tear, finishing, knocking off top 5s and top 10s. And then he went to Atlanta where he won his race and not only led a ton of laps, but beat his brother Kyle and actually dominated that race. He had the best car in that event on speed legitimately, which is why he earned that win. And he got that win and was able to make it to the NASCAR Cup Series Playoffs this year with Chip Ganassi Racing shutting down, unfortunately. He was able to get Chip Ganassi Racing their final win at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Kurt Busch also going to a new team, going to be really fun to watch next year. But he had a pretty good year in the Cup Series this year. He just, unfortunately, did not do enough. I thought he'd make it to the round of 12, which he almost ended up making it to the round of 12. It's just unfortunate. He did have problems in the early portion of the round of 16, which unfortunately cost him an opportunity to make it later in the season. But Kurt Busch had a pretty good year, and he was pretty good this season, in my honest opinion. In the number 11 position, we have the driver of the 48 car for Hendrick Motorsports, Alex Bowman. Alex Bowman had 4 wins, 8 top 5s, 16 top 10s, had a 15.1 average finish, and led 161 laps in the season. Now, a lot of you are asking, why do you have Alex Bowman that low when he has 4 wins in the season? Well, the issue with Alex Bowman is while Alex Bowman did get 4 wins this year, he didn't lead in entirely a ton of laps in the season. And on top of that, Alex Bowman actually was extremely inconsistent when he wasn't running up front. As a matter of fact, he only had 4 other top 5s in this year that weren't wins. Now, don't get me wrong, Alex Bowman was not absolutely bad in this year. He actually had a good year, but for his standards compared to 2020, where he was much more consistent and made it to the round of 8, he had a lot more wins, but he was way more inconsistent. Now, I heard that they're using that as basically the experimental car. So he had a pretty good year for those standards, but he wasn't a top 10 driver in my opinion. I expect a little more, and then he got eliminated in the round of 12, which unfortunately affected him. So he sits number 11 on my list, and that is my opinion on Alex Bowman's season. In the number 10 position, we have the driver of the 2 car for Team Penske, Brad Keselowski. Brad Keselowski scored 1 win in the season, 10 top 5s, 17 top 10s, had a 13th place average finish, and had 331 laps led. I'll admit, Brad Keselowski started off this year really, really well. In the first quarter of the season, Brad Keselowski was extremely consistent and had a lot of top 5s and a lot of top 10s, and he was able to win that race at Talladega. But once the rumors started going out about him taking over, going to Roush to be a co-owner / driver of the team, Brad fell off a cliff. Now, once we got to the playoffs, though, I do think Brad actually improved and actually had a chance to almost make the Final Four of this season. But I think that middle portion this year is why Brad Keselowski is this low on this list. And I do hope next year he does a little bit better when he does go over to Roush. But he sits number 10 in my honest opinion. I expect a little bit more from Brad Keselowski in the season. I'll admit that Team Penske overall this year in Ford really kind of took a nosedive this year in somewhat of their performances. They got a lot less wins this year than they did in previous years. And Brad Keselowski sits number 10 on my list because he wasn't as good as he was last year. He made the Final Four last year. He did get to the round of 8, but he could have done a little better this season, to be honest with you. In the number 9 position, we have the driver of the 22 for Team Penske, Joey Logano. Joey Logano got 1 win, had 10 top 5s, 19 top 10s, had a 12.6 average finish, and led 453 laps this season. All I meant is about Joey Logano. Joey Logano really was really quiet in the season. It really wasn't a driver that caused a lot of problems throughout the season, which is really surprising considering Joey Logano. His only win, though, this year came at Briscoe, and that's the race where Kyle Larson basically wrecked out, and had Kyle Larson run that, I think Joey Logano may have come out of the season with his first winless season since 2011. Had he not won that race at Briscoe, he could have had his first winless season in a very long time. But I think Joey Logano is a really great driver. I just don't think this year that he was as good as he was even last year. And I don't think the last couple years he has been as good. However, I do think that Joey Logano has been a really great driver in the Cup Series. I just want to hopefully see him do a little bit better going into next year. He wasn't up front as much in the season, which really affected his performance and Team Penske's performance as a whole. So in my opinion, he's a little bit lower than you probably put him on some of your lists, but he sits number 9 on my list. In the number 8 position, we have the driver for the 24 for Hendrick Motorsports, William Byron. William Byron got 1 win. He had 12 top 5s, 20 top 10s, had an 8.7 average finish, and 425 laps led. While William Byron wasn't winning races, he was extremely consistent throughout this year, a lot of times finishing in the top 10, and really did not have that many DNFs this year. It's just what unfortunately cost him was he had a terrible round of 12 that unfortunately cost him a run at a chance to win the championship. But especially in the playoffs this year, oh my God, it felt like could he win the race? There were a couple of times where he had the best car in the race. Texas, Kansas, and a chance to win Martinsville too, was really, really fast in those races in the second half of the season. I do think the future of William Byron is really, really good, especially after a great end of the year. It's just the reason he's this slow is he didn't win more races. How he got some more wins this year, do you feel like William Byron could have had also a chance to make the championship four because he was really, really fast at points throughout this year. But he did have a good year as a whole. He sits number 8 on my list. In the number 7 position, we have the driver of the 4 car for SHR, Kevin Harvick. Kevin Harvick is the last driver on this list with no wins in the season. This also is his first season he's not won a race since 2009. But he did have 10 top 5s, 24 top 10s, had a 10.9 average finish, and led 217 laps on the season. Kevin Harvick definitely had a down year for his standards, and the reason he's not higher in this is because Kevin Harvick did not win a race this year, but he did have a good year for the car he was in. And I don't think that the SHR cars in 2021 were as good as they were in 2020. And even then, Kevin Harvick still did have a really good year, especially with the car. And he did have some temper this year, not to mention against Chase Elliott. He and Chase Elliott got into a feud, and there were issues between those two, which kind of unfortunately affect Kevin Harvick on speed as well. But they got better as the Plas came in and showed some speed in those races and almost got a very clutch win and got his only win of the season since Bristol last year. But I think that Kevin Harvick will still have to wait to see what goes on for his future. But he did have a decent year considering the car he was in, and he sits number 7 on this list. In the number 6 position, we have the driver of the 18 for Joe Gibbs Racing, Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch scored 2 wins, 14 top 5s, 22 top 10s, had a 12.8 average finish, and had 334 laps led on the season. Kyle Busch definitely came back a little bit. He wasn't back to his true self like he was in early 2019 and 2018, but I do think that Kyle Busch bounced back in a lot of ways. He was able to make the round of 8 this year, and like I said, he was able to get 2 wins this year in the NASCAR Cup Series season, and 14 top 5s and 22 top 10s, and that average finish really isn't that bad. It's just unfortunate Kyle Busch didn't have as much speed at points as his other teammates had throughout the year. But, like I said, Kyle Busch had a pretty year for the standards and a pretty good year for Kyle Busch this year. I think Ben Bayshore actually is not a bad crew chief. I think he's a pretty decent crew chief. I just don't think the setups were entirely right. Their setups definitely in 2021 compared to 2020 were much better, and their cars were much more prepared and much better than they had been in previous years. So, Kyle Busch had a decent year in my opinion. Hopefully going next year he does well, but they're starting off on the wrong foot. Ben Bayshore being suspended for the LA Clash. But Kyle Busch had a decent year as a whole. He sits number 6 on this list. In the number 5 position, we have the driver of the 19 for Joe Gibbs Racing, Martin Truex Jr. Martin Truex Jr. had 4 wins this year, had 13 top 5s, 20 top 10s, had a 12th place average finish, and had 865 laps led on the season. Martin Truex Jr. 2021 compared to Martin Truex Jr. in 2020, he was much, much better. He and James Small really, really gelled. And it's not saying that Martin Truex Jr. 2020 was really, really bad. Martin Truex Jr., though, compared to this year, he was a little bit more consistent. Martin Truex Jr. 2020 was extremely consistent, but he only got 1 win. Compared to this year, where Martin Truex Jr. actually got 4 wins this year, all on 750 tracks, and he was able to make it to the championship 4, and he almost actually won the championship this year. Had that caution not come out for David Starr, I feel like he would have held off Denny Hamlin and gotten his 2nd NASCAR Cup Series championship. But at points, Martin Truex Jr. just had some points where he wasn't really as good, especially in the middle of the summer. There was a stretch there where he failed to finish in the top 10. I remember back at Dover where I thought he was going to win that race, and he just didn't show up. The car was absolutely horrendous, and they didn't have a lot of speed, and the Hendrick cars really outperformed them. And I think they had a flat tire in that event as well, and they really weren't as amazing in the summer stretch of the season. But at the same time, Martin Truex Jr., especially compared to this year, compared to last year, had a much better year, and he sits number 5 on this list. In the number 4 position, we have the driver of the 9 car for Hendrick Motorsports, Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott scored 2 wins, had 15 top 5s, had 21 top 10s, had 11.4 average finish, and had 952 laps led on this season. Chase Elliott definitely had a little bit of a down year when it came to the wins column, but Chase Elliott really did not lose a lot of his speed this season. As a matter of fact, he made the Final Four for the 2nd year in a row, and almost won the championship again this year, and still 952 laps led was really, really good. But here's the fact. Chase Elliott not only won his race on road course this year, but he actually only won on tracks had America in the name. COTA and Road America, Circuit Americas and Road America, which is definitely an interesting fact. He probably should have gotten more wins in the season. He had some issues at tracks like Daytona Road Course, and he kind of got a lucky win at COTA and probably could have had a chance to win the Glen had there been no issues happen. But he still had a pretty good year as a whole, Going next year, can he bounce back and try to win his second championship? That's something they're going to have to wait and see. But he had a pretty good year as a whole. He sits number 4 on this list. In the number 3 position, we have the driver of the 12-14 Penske, Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney had a breakout year this year. He scored 3 wins, 11 top 5s, 20 top 10s, had 11.9 average finish, and had 423 laps led this season. This is the first year that Ryan Blaney really impressed me. We were wondering, can he get multiple wins in a single season? And for the first time in his career, he got multiple wins. He picked up wins this year at Atlanta in a clutch victory against Kyle Larson, and then got back-to-back victories at Michigan and Daytona. And actually was really looking like he had a chance to make the Final Four this year. But unfortunately, he had issues at Kansas, which unfortunately cost him as Austin Dillon got loose. And he unfortunately got into the outside wall and had a lot of damage, which cost him a run at the championship. But Ryan Blaney had a really good year. He improved throughout the year and was the best driver, performing driver. I think the best performing forward all this year, to be honest with you. Had a great year as a whole, and he sits number 3 on my list with a really solid year in the NASCAR Cup Series. In the second position and the runner-up position, we have the driver of the 11th car for Denny Hamlin at Joe Gibbs Racing. Denny Hamlin had 2 wins this year, had 19 top 5s, 25 top 10s, had an 8.4 average finish, and had a 1,502 laps led. For most of the year, we were wondering if Denny Hamlin was going to get a win, and his first win did not come until Darlington. But Denny Hamlin had an extremely impressive season this year. Considering he only got 2 wins this year, he was extremely consistent throughout this year. So much he was the only driver that really was comparable to Kyle Larson this year in many ways. And I'll be honest, he probably should have had a few more wins early in the year to the win total. He was that good this year throughout the year. And him getting some of those wins could have made a major difference to Denny Hamlin having a chance to win that regular season championship. But at the same time, Denny Hamlin had a really good year. He unfortunately came up short to finally getting his first championship this year by finishing, I believe, 4th in the final race of the season. But Denny Hamlin did have a very good year in my opinion, and hopefully going into next year he can improve. Maybe get some more wins on the win column, and maybe he can do really great going into next year. But it's something we're going to have to wait for going into next season. And in the definitive number 1 position, we have the driver of the 5 car and the 2021 NASCAR Cup Series champion, Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson scored an incredible 10 wins in the 2021 season, had 20 top 5s, 26 top 10s, had a 9.1 average finish, and had 2,581 laps led. What is there not to say about Kyle Larson? Kyle Larson, no doubt, was the most dominant driver of the season. He's the first driver to have 10 wins in a season since Jimmy Johnson in 2007. He's the first driver to win 5 races in the playoffs since Tony Stewart in 2011. He's the first driver in this playoff system to win each and every single round. In the round of 16, he won at Bristol. In the round of 12, he won at the Roval. And in the round of 8, he won Texas and Kansas, and then won the championship race at Phoenix. And he won at so many different types of tracks. Won at road courses like Watkins Glen, Sonoma, and also won at another road course, the Charlotte Roval. Was really fast. Indy road course, had a chance to win that. He also probably should have won a few more other races in the season as well, but unfortunately those did not go his way. On top of that, his dirt expertise. Won the Knoxville Nationals, won the Prairie Dirt Classic, won so many incredible events throughout this year, and talk has begun about him potentially running the Indianapolis 500 next year. But Kyle Larson, I don't care what any of you say, he was the best this year in my opinion, definitively number 1, and he was the best driver in the 2021 NASCAR Cup Series season. So anyway, that is my ranking of every NASCAR Cup Series driver that competed in seven or more events in the season. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications so you're notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support page for link search below for that, and comment your rankings for the 2021 season. Who do you think was the worst performing driver of the season to the best performing driver in the 2021 season? Let me know from first, and let me know who you think was the best, and let me know who you think was the worst. Let me know in the comments below. Got a lot more special content that's going to be dropping on this channel really soon. You guys should definitely be looking forward to. There's a lot of special end-of-year content that will be coming out. Maybe something special coming out this weekend, but you'll have to wait and see on my channel. But anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys next time with some more great and awesome NASCAR and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.